I did not like Splatoon Raiders. This is, I think, going to be kind of a controversial video for some of you because I was calling this game out like fairly early on because I felt it would get repetitive. I felt it was kind of brain dead. I felt like it didn't do enough to innovate. And a lot of people came after me saying that I was a hater, that I was a pretendo, that I didn't understand what the game was trying to do. And in all actuality, now that I finished it, I have realized that not only was I completely 100% right, the people praising this game are doing so for the silliest reasons. Most self-evidently, people are hyping this up because this is basically a single-player shooter, something that is pretty much unheard of in this day and age. This isn't really like Destiny or Borderlands, in which you're constantly playing with other people and constantly wanting to play multiplayer. Like, there are lots of times in this game where you are going to be on your own, clearing these dungeons, collecting loot, finding treasure. There are multiplayer features in this, but in a lot of ways, they're just there to help you out through difficult scenarios. They aren't on by default. Typically, you use multiplayer when you want to grind or you want to get through a tough stage, and the game goes to great lengths to discourage you from doing that all the time. If you want to progress, there are going to be times where you are going to go in single player. And this is why the game is so popular, because the real reason Splatoon has been so polarizing in the Western world is because it is a PvP game. Like, the issue with that is that people have been filtered by Splatoon over and over again for over a decade, and as a result of that, really know nothing about the brand, the series, the game, or its long history of high-quality single-player content. And that's why you have a lot of people coming out here declaring this to be the best Splatoon ever, because they simply have no frame of reference for what this series has accomplished with previous single-player campaigns. Now, it's true that the campaigns in the older games were quite a bit shorter, but they were higher quality. They had better level design. They had better music. They had better boss fights. They had pretty much better everything except maybe game length. Because that's really the only thing I can take away from Splatoon Raiders is that it is pretty solidly long for a single-player Splatoon experience, right? You have cool level-up mechanics. You have a pretty riveting story. You have a great characterization from Deep Cut. You have, great visuals. The frame rate doesn't drop. It's intense. There's a lot of content in the game. But, by and large, it's just not as good as what you would see in a typical single-player Splatoon adventure, because typical Splatoon games are able to be more compact. They're able to shove more ideas in a smaller time frame, and they're not trying to carry the entire game with a single-player campaign. When you play Splatoon Raiders, what you end up doing is playing the same stages over and over again, fighting the same enemies over and over, and trying desperately to level up your character so you can beat the game. And this game is kind of unusual because the actual gameplay mechanic, as always, is fantastic. Like, the mechanics are great. They're a lot of fun. Leveling up is amazing. Gathering materials, upgrading your stuff, tricking out your character. In a lot of ways, this is the most fun to play Splatoon has ever been in single player. But the problem comes from the general structure and the level design. Because the game is set up like a single-player level select adventure instead of what it probably should have been, where you just go to certain locations on the map and fight monsters, okay? It doesn't really make any sense that you go around in a circle clearing these dungeons one after another that get progressively more difficult. Realistically, I feel like dangerous salmonids should be everywhere at all times, and that you should be specifically seeking out the weaker ones first and then slowly working your way up to the more difficult ones. The way the game is structured just leads you to going to the same locations, fighting the same enemies over and over again, instead of having unique, interesting level designs. You're going to see the same themes over and over again. You're going to see listen to the same music. You're going to be fighting the same enemies. Like, there's no real sense of like creativity or charm. Like, it's kind of remarkable. Like, in spite of how long the game is, in spite of how much, like, how many salmonids you fight, like, you end up feeling as if Salmon Run in Splatoon 3 has more content because the bosses are more intense. They're more difficult to beat. Like, they take more resources to take down, right? They have better designs. They're more difficult. They're more threatening. Like, when a boss salmonid shows up in Splatoon 3, it's a big deal, right? When you look at the bosses in this game, yeah, they have interesting designs. They're distinct, but like they're somehow not really as impressive. And that's like the weird takeaway from this game too, is that like in spite of everything it does well, the entire experience feels super amateurish. Like, it feels super basic. So, for example, you technically have a variety of different missions you can go on. You can hunt down giant crystals. You can go through these small stages. You have like typical Splatoon like hidden stages where you unlock like skill points. Like, there are like on the surface like 4 or 5 different kinds of stages that you're going to go through in this game. But like, realistically, what you're going to be doing 90% of the time is going through the gauntlets over and over again, grinding materials, grinding EXP, grinding weapons, like just trying to level up to make the next gauntlet a little bit easier. Like, that's basically all you do. Like, I really question the decision to have anything other than gauntlets in this game, because so many of them just feel kind of pointless. Like, when you play gauntlets, you're going to struggle, you're going to die, you're going to fail all the time. But even if you have other players with you, but then you go into like the bigger areas, you go into the maps, you go into like, the crystal stages, and like what you end up finding out is that like it's quite a bit easier, and that it's nowhere near as intense, and like it's very easy to just keep your distance and then just like keep grinding away at the enemy until it dies. No matter how difficult it is, they can't really swarm you in like areas this big. Like, the game feels as if they tried making a bigger, more expansive Salmon Run with like actual environments, and yet like they didn't really change the way salmonids behave. Like, it's kind of ridiculous in that sense. Like, how salmonids are so much fun to fight in Salmon Run, where they're swarming everywhere and they can come from anywhere. But like here, they just kind of feel like basic enemies, which is kind of ridiculous considering what happens in the plot. But that's that goes into spoiler territory. But like, this should have been a game that really like pushed salmonids as like a legit actual like faction in Splatoon, that really should have like made them threatening, that really should have like shown like more dangerous variants of them. And like, the simple fact of the matter is that like that just did not happen. With how basic the upgrades turn out being and how simplistic the gameplay loop is, like, it really feels like to me this really could have been a DLC for Splatoon 3. And the fact that they decided to make it its own standalone game, I think, was kind of a mistake. I don't know if like they did this to produce a tech demo for the Switch 2 or what, because it's very interesting how the frame rate does not drop no matter how much stuff is happening on the screen. Like, it's actually very impressive, but like the game as a whole doesn't really feel as if it justifies having its own $50 release. Okay. Like, it just feels weirdly repetitive. It feels weirdly amateurish. It feels like kind of experimental. Like, it feels like it needed a lot more polish to kind of stick out from the pack. And like, everything in this game, going from like say the new mechanics, like say the bot hop, to like the way the final boss is structured, like a lot of it makes absolutely no sense at all. Like, one of the things that happened to me, going through the final boss, like, you can't die on it. Like, you just respawn endlessly. The only way you can lose the fight is if you run out of time. And it's just such a weird, like, way to structure your final encounter, like against the final super boss, like apocalyptic scenario. It's just like, to me, it just feels like such a massive step down from previous entries. DJ Octavio from one, 3 had a final boss, 2 had like the one of the best secret final bosses ever with like the Real Agent 3. Like Splatoon has a real strong history of like high quality boss fights, but in this one, because of like the RPG mechanics and because of like just basic design flaws, like they're really not all that interesting or fun to fight. Like it's really weird, like saying this in like the single player Splatoon game, but like the bosses are a massive step down from what we're used to seeing. Like they don't have as fun like gameplay loops. They're not as skill based. Like basically all you need to do is just have good enough equipment to handle its attacks as you like take it down as quickly as possible. That's basically it. Like maybe they get better on the higher difficulties that do exist, but like for me, going through the game for the first time, like I'm playing these bosses, and especially like the icy one, and they genuinely come off as like the weakest bosses I've played in a Nintendo game in a long time, because they're not interesting visually. They're not fun to fight. They're not interesting. They don't have good stories. They don't have a lot of personality. Like they're just not interesting characters. Splatoon Raiders has this problem where it wants to be radically different from mainline Splatoon games, but it was completely unwilling to move away from the core gameplay loop and structure of the single player campaigns. Like this is a game that really should have had you like coming up with radical like new technology or gimmicks or features, and in to the to the least possible degree that is true. Like you do have a lot more gadgets, you do have a lot more firepower, you do level up in this game, you do get stronger, but it's like it doesn't ever feel as if it quite hits the mark where it needs to be. Because for an example, you have a base building mechanic, okay? You level up the base like twice and you unlock some new features on it. You get some targets, it looks nicer, but like it doesn't really do anything for the gameplay. And it kind of dawned on me, like, while I was like playing like the final stages, is that like we're dealing with salmonids, and yet they somehow never come on board. They never try to attack us. They never do anything. Like, how interesting would that be if, like, during raids, you would come back to find like salmonids attacking the base, and you would have to like defend it, and like you would have to like, then repair it afterward, and like, treat it like a real survival experience, right? Where you're actually in conflict with these things. Like, I just found this. I just found the idea of the base really, really interesting in and of itself, but like the actual execution was lacking. Like gear equipment. You can radically change your. You have a lot of options when it comes to your weapons, when it comes to your gadgets, when it comes to like your class, right? The things you have available to you. Like you have like 3 different characters that can get in the robot and like join you on your adventure, but like all of that is kind of superficial, because at its core, you're just going to end up doing the exact same thing no matter what you do. You're going to be leveling up your equipment. You're going to be like, dealing with your bot, which cannot be upgraded and plays exactly the same no matter who's piloting it, with only a different special move to compensate. Like you look at like everything this game does, and it really feels as if it almost could have been great. Like you look at like all these things they had planned and all these things they did, and it's like it could have been a lot better, and yet somehow it just doesn't hit the mark. But at the same time, it's also quite a bit better than Side Order, because for those of you who don't know, Side Order was like actually one of my most hated Nintendo games of all time, right? The DLC for Splatoon 3 was awful, and I was very upfront about that. Like I still to this day have not finished it. Like it is downright unplayable. Like to me, Raiders almost feels like they were fixing the problems with Side Order, where they made the environments more fleshed out. They got rid of the roguelite elements. They added in more RPG elements. Like the gameplay loop is the exact same, only with with RPG elements that always carry over instead of resetting on different runs. Side order is interesting because of what a failure it was and how everyone hated it. But Raiders, was the game side order should have been to begin with. And that's kind of my mindset on it because Raiders, I think, does a way better job of building off of story elements from Splatoon 2. It does a lot more with deep cut. It does a lot more to like expand the world and setting um, of Splatoon outside of like side orders weird like marina focus uh story like Raiders was had a lot more potential than Side Order did, and it is better than Side Order. But at the same time, it still has a lot of the same problems that Side Order did, where it's not as fun to play as Salmon Run. It's very limited in what it tries to do, and like it really should have tried doing something radically different than the core Splatoon experience. And I feel like this is the core problem with these games now is that the developers aren't willing to experiment with different with gameplay changes because they're so adamant about pushing like the third person shooter idea. Like they're not really willing to acknowledge that Splatoon was deliberately designed as a PvP game, that this was always originally meant to be an online shooter. And as a result of that, like in a lot of ways, the mechanics and systems of Splatoon just don't translate well to single player games. Like if they're going to make a Splatoon single player experience, they're going to have to really seriously retool the way these games work and play. And Raiders is absolutely the best attempt they've ever made at that. But at the same time, like it didn't go nearly far enough. Like I look at the levels in these games and I'm just like, why don't we have more variety? Why don't we have new mechanics? Why don't they experiment more? Why don't they take more risks? Like the simple fact of the matter is Raiders plays exactly like a salmon run, adventure mode. It's just like the exact same thing. Like there was just no consideration to like evolve the gameplay past what's already been established. Like there has been no real evolution when it comes to Splatoon single player games in the past decade. It's the same mechanically as it's always been. They have tacked on roguelite elements and RPG elements to it, but at the end of the day, they're really gonna have to like do a better job of like having the characters do things other than shooting at other things. And I think that's the core problem with Splatoon at this point is that they're not willing to commit to other genres. They're not willing to like experiment. They're not willing to do wild and interesting things. Like cuz they're too scared to. They're worried about what the reception will be if they move away from simply being a basic ass third person shooter. It's kind of wild to think that, going from Super Mario Bros. 1, 2, and 3, that we got more innovation in 2D Mario game than we've ever seen in Splatoon. By the 90s, we were getting Mario Sports and Mario Party and Mario Kart. We saw some like real variation in like what Mario could be. And with Splatoon, like there's just been this like complete refusal to do that. Like I don't understand why it would be so difficult to throw something like this into Splatoon 4 and make it like just a 6-hour long campaign, alongside the primary single player campaign, alongside a couple of other like shorter single player modes to throw in some variety, right? Like, I don't understand why this had to be its own game. And in fact, I think that's probably the worst thing about it is that like, I think the game would have worked far more effectively if it had simply been like attached to Splatoon 4. Like I don't understand why they turned this into like some 20-hour 10 15-hour campaign when like realistically it would have been way better if they had just take condensed it into like a shorter experience and just bundle it in with like proper Splatoon 4. Like I don't think like a spin-off game like this is really necessary because it didn't change the core fundamental mechanics of a Splatoon game. Like if they're not changing the mechanics, then like why exactly is this not attached to like a core product? Again, this was the big problem with Splatoon 3 that I had is that like, yeah, you have like multiplayer, you have the single player, you have Salmon Run, but like those were all modes that were in Splatoon 2. And by the time Side Order finally came out, which was something different, it sucked. So like Raiders to me, like it really feels like this is what the DLC for Splatoon 3 should have been, right? I feel like this feels more like a DLC than an actually full-fledged game in its own right. And I don't necessarily feel as if this game is living up to the hype that others have set for it. So my final thoughts on this game are yes, it is mid. There are things to like about it. It's not a bad game by any stretch of the imagination. I did have quite a lot of fun with it. There are things that work. If you're a Splatoon fan, you've probably already played it. But like at the end of the day, I don't feel as if this is like the spin-off game that I really wanted from the franchise. Like I feel that they need to do a lot more to grow the brand and experiment with different concepts and ideas. And just doing the same thing over and over again isn't really helping anybody. It's not really developing the brand. It's not really evolving the formula. It's not really making the games better. Right now, it feels like a lot of people are on board with this idea that like Splatoon Raiders is a major step forward in the franchise and that this is the release that justifies the Switch 2. And I really couldn't disagree with that more. I actually think Raiders might be the most disappointed I've been in a Switch 2 game yet. I can't think of anything that I've played that was more disappointing than this, at least from a Nintendo first party perspective. So it very well may be like my least favorite Switch 2 exclusive so far. I'm gonna have to look and see at like what else has come out, but like I genuinely think I enjoyed Hyrule Warriors more than this, and that was probably the my go-to example of games I was disappointed in before this. Um, I find that like Splatoon Raiders just the people hyping this game don't really seem to know a lot about Splatoon and don't really know a lot about its history and don't really know a lot about like, how disappointing of a release this is. Like, it's a spin-off. So I don't know how much this will damage the overall series. But I think the bigger problem is that this is the second Splatoon release in a row that I've been extraordinarily disappointed by because I hated Side Order as well. I liked base Splatoon 3, but I hated Side Order. And I feel like this is becoming a trend now where they're releasing a new Splatoon product and there's always like something crazy wrong with it. Like something that just ruins the entire experience. And like right now we're kind of in this weird situation where people just look the other way and pretend it's not happening. It's weird. Splatoon's in a weird place right now because Splatoon 3 was written off and ignored when it was good. And now that like, Raiders is out and people are enjoying it, it kind of has the opposite problem where it feels like people are praising mediocrity and something that didn't really innovate and something that doesn't really like bring a whole lot to the table. It's very, very frustrating. And Splatoon 3 wasn't particularly great in and of itself because at the end of the day, it really was just the same exact thing as Splatoon 2. Like, yeah, maybe the balancing was better and maybe like they didn't have to rush it as much. But like at the end of the day, Splatoon 3 felt like it didn't really innovate over 2 already. And 2 felt like it didn't innovate a lot over 1. So what we're seeing here is that we're seeing possibly the most stagnant Nintendo franchise there is right now. And because it's still like a relatively young IP, I feel like most people aren't really willing to criticize it for this reason. But when you compare it to something like Animal Crossing or Star Fox or like Metroid, and like you see just how much these games change over time, like Splatoon really sticks out like a sore thumb. Like, why exactly are we getting the exact same thing repackaged over and over again? Like, I don't want to say it's as bad as Call of Duty, but it's kind of playing the same game. Okay. And I do think that like the several year long gaps between releases like mitigate like the issue somewhat because I think new people are coming in all the time who have never heard of these games before. But like at the end of the day, like I think they need to be doing more to kind of make this into like the Nintendo shooter series. Like I do think they should be branching out into strategy games. I do think they should be branching out into like rhythm games. I think they should be like, doing a lot more with single player focused spin-offs like this. Like I feel like this was nowhere near the level of quality I expected from Nintendo, and I feel as if like this is kind of becoming a trend with like these younger developers where it feels like they're more interested in spectacle and like creating storylines and like characters than they are in actually like making good games that are actually fun to play. I kind of had the same problem with Bonanza actually, where like instead of creating like a fun, interesting new antagonist, they just brought K. Rool back out of retirement. And a lot of people clapped at the idea because K. Rool is a beloved character. But on the flip side, what ended up happening is that like you missed out on the opportunity to create a new antagonist and to create like a new beloved icon. Like the simple fact of the matter is like in a lot of ways we really do need to start acknowledging that um these games do need to evolve. They need to keep introducing new elements. They need to keep like staying fresh. And when it comes to Splatoon, that just isn't happening. When it came to like Donkey Kong Bonanza, that didn't really happen. And there are definitely plenty of Nintendo franchises that don't have that problem. Yoshi and the Mysterious Book is probably the most obvious example. Way better game than this, by the way. Like there are definitely a lot of other alternatives that like demonstrate that like Nintendo is constantly evolving, but there are also examples that aren't. You look at something like Kirby Air Riders and like it looks and plays exactly like the old game. Like it doesn't feel like a new experience. Like it feels like kind of a rehash of the original with very few additions and like new modes and features. It's just like, you know, kind of the exact same thing again. And you can kind of say the same thing for Smash, and you can kind of say the same thing for like a handful of other franchises. Like we need to stop like with this mindset that games should stay the same forever. Like I feel like this is becoming a bit of a problem for certain Nintendo franchises now because certain people will not accept change. And even with something like Zelda, right? You see a lot of people these days like advocating for the return of like traditional 3D gaming, but like um that 3D formula was hated. Like even in the 2000s, people were saying it was stale, outdated, and boring, and that wasn't true. These were the best games made during that period, but like the masses really had that mindset that the series needed to grow and evolve, and that's what led to Breath of the Wild. One of the best games ever made. So like Splatoon really desperately needs that kind of retooling to kind of freshen it up and kind of like evolve the formula, because the way it's been going lately is that like it is the most stagnant Nintendo IP out there, and that desperately needs to change.